All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and our next guest is Fred Branfman. Our first guest on the show today is Fred Branfman. He runs the website trulyalive.org. He has an archive at the Huffington Post and also writes for AlterNet. His latest for AlterNet is in the Viewpoint section on antiwar.com today, isn't it? Yeah. And it's really good. It's called Obama's Secret Wars, How Our Shady Counter-Terrorism Policies Are More Dangerous Than Terrorism. Welcome back to the show, Fred. How are you doing?
Great.
It's been a long time since we spoke. I really dig this article. It's about the brand new, quote-unquote, national strategy for counterterrorism. The best summary and criticism of this thing I've seen so far. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about the future of the terror war according to the Obama White House?
Well, I think we should begin with a quote from the document itself. It says that the U.S. government intends to, quote, disrupt, dismantle, and eventually defeat al-Qaeda and its affiliates and adherents in the following, quote, areas of focus, unquote. Now, listen to this, Scott. Here are the areas of focus. The homeland, meaning America, South Asia, Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, Europe, Iraq, Maghreb, and Sahel, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. Now, it's been packaged as
they left out Russia.
Yeah, right. A good point. I don't know why. It's been packaged as a surgical strike only aimed at a small number of al-Qaeda leaders planning to kill Americans. But in fact, by their own official documents, we now have 60,000 special operations forces whose mission it is to assassinate people. Right now, they're operating in 6 Muslim countries, totaling 280 million people, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Iraq. And they're, particularly since David Petraeus is now taking over the CIA, his mission will be to integrate the U.S. military assassination capacity and the CIA assassination capacity into one, what this is not my quote, what Lieutenant Colonel retired Nagel, John Nagel calls an industrial-sized killing machine. We presently have an industrial-sized killing machine operating in 6 Muslim countries that has taken it upon themselves to surveil, hunt, kidnap, and or murder anyone they choose without any judicial oversight, without any the victim having any rights. What most of us, when we were growing up, the only organizations that supposedly operated that way were the Gestapo and the KGB, but we now have an industrial-sized killing machine that takes it upon itself to murder anyone they want anywhere on Earth at their own choosing. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone listening to this program what the moral and legal implications are of that, so I'll skip over that for a moment. This program, President Obama's National Strategy for Counterterrorism, is also justified on the basis, of course, that it's going to protect us against people who are trying to murder us, that it's enhancing national security. But there's overwhelming evidence that the opposite is true, that as a result of these drone strikes and assassination are in fact strengthening the forces who want to kill us, increasing the ranks of potential suicide bombers exponentially, this destabilizing friendly governments, and increasing the risks of both conventional and nuclear attacks on the United States. And let me just take one example. The greatest laboratory for this so-called counterterrorism strategy today is Pakistan, where, as you know, we're flying hundreds of drone strikes and have ground assassination teams operating in the tribal areas. Now, they have killed several thousand people. They can only name 56 al-Qaeda leaders by name. The rest of them are people who they have no idea who they are. They could be Reuters cameraman carrying cameras. But that aside, let's assume that even that we have killed 2,000 militants who want to attack America, which is totally untrue. But let's assume that for one moment. We have created tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. In the course of killing these 2,000 people, we've created tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who want to kill Americans and who are threatening the Pakistani government. Since David Petraeus became AFPAC commander and began attacking northwest Pakistan, the insurgent forces have quadrupled. This is by official count, their attacks, and they've grown far stronger, according to former CIA counter-terrorism chief Robert Grenier. They've organized themselves. They're cooperating together. And whereas before their main concern was the Pakistani government, they've now expanded their mission into what Grenier, the CIA counterterrorism chief, calls a global jihad against Americans. The unfortunate fact is that the likelihood that large numbers of Americans are going to die over the next decade from this policy is really beyond any serious doubt. The fundamental mistake of President Obama's, but really David Petraeus's national strategy for counterterrorism is there's an assumption that there's a limited number of al-Qaeda people who want to kill us, and if we kill, let's say, 10% of them, we've reduced the threat by 10%. But in fact, this is a kind of grade school mentality. In the real world, there's 1.8 billion Muslims. There's an endless number of new recruits to jihad that are being angered by this counterterrorism strategy. To kill a few thousand people and create hundreds of thousands of more who want to kill us is quite literally insane in my view. And I think what we have to understand is what Julian Assange has talked about after reading all these WikiLeaks documents, that no one's really in charge anymore of American policy abroad. It's basically a bunch of different groups, the CIA, the military, the military companies, all competing to advance their own interests, which in this case is going after the money available to create this industrial-sized killing machine. And the result is that American national security is much weaker as a result of this so-called counterterrorism policy. And one last point, Scott, that I think is very important to remember. I know it's hard for a lot of people. Most of us, many of us who are critics of the U.S. are used to thinking of our leaders as evil or immoral or wrong. It's very hard for us to accept the fact that they're also utterly incompetent. They have no idea what they're doing. And if you don't believe this, let's back up a moment. The only concern is to stave off defeat until the next election. So in Vietnam, they constantly escalated in the cause of staving off defeat till the next election. And by the end of that enterprise, 55,000 Americans were killed, several hundred thousand were wounded, and over 3 million Indo-Chinese were murdered. And we lost. They supported the Shah of Iran. In fact, Henry Kissinger made the Shah of Iran the linchpin of the so-called Nixon doctrine. Within a year of his doing so, the Shah was overthrown, and we got a virulently anti-U.S. Regime in Iran, which has become one of the number one problems facing the United States today. But Khomeini would not have come to power if our leaders hadn't stupidly supported the Shah. But we then went ahead and gave Saddam Hussein enormous amounts of weapons, the technology for so-called weapons of mass destruction, to get him to fight against the Iranians. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Fred. We'll have to hold it right there as we go out to this break. I want to recommend again that everyone go and check out this article. It's incredibly comprehensive and full of excellent points. It's at AlterNet. Obama's Secret Wars, how our shady counterterrorism policies are more dangerous than terrorism. We'll be right back with more after this. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Fred Branfman. His new piece at AlterNet.org is called Obama's Secret Wars, How Our Shady Counter-Terrorism Policies Are More Dangerous Than Terrorism. And it's an extensive review of the new so-called counterterrorism strategy published by the White House or the Pentagon last month. And now, when we went out to the break, Fred, you were talking about the inherent stupidity of the empire and giving the example of backing Iran, and then we have to back Saddam Hussein against the reaction to our, puppet dictatorship being overthrown in Iran, and then, of course, Saddam Hussein gets too big for his britches, so then we got to go have a war against him, and then, all these things, the way that they all turn, crisis to worse crisis. Although I'm not certain that's an argument for stupidity. I mean, it seems to me that at a certain point, the people at the highest levels of power, whether on Wall Street, in the Pentagon, they must realize that stupidity and failure always benefit them. So why not, blockade and bomb Iraq for 10 years straight from bases in Saudi Arabia, especially if that's what's pissing off Osama bin Laden and making him want to attack us? Good. The reaction to our intervention will justify more intervention. Same with the war in Pakistan, leading to the fall of that government and an excuse to intervene to go and seize those Islamic bombs from them before they get into the hands of the bad guys that wouldn't be anywhere near the position to get them if it wasn't for our intervention. So you say the same thing about Somalia, where now they pretend that they never intervened there, but all of a sudden we have this Al-Shabaab problem that we have to go and have a secret war against in Somalia. They love this stuff, right? Why would they ever choose to act smart if all their incentives are to keep screwing up and buy more drones, more bombs, make more money? Kill more people.
I mean, I have this argument a lot with my friends. All I can say is that let's just take one very specific example. Ambassador Ann Patterson, U.S. Ambassador, says in the WikiLeaks documents that there's a great danger that nuclear materials will fall into the hands of people unfriendly to the United States. Bruce Riedel has just written a book called Deadly Embrace about Pakistan, saying it's almost inevitable that there's going to be a coup there. Not almost inevitable, but there's an inevitable possibility that there'll be a coup there, and an Islamic emirate will get a hold of nuclear weapons, which could then threaten the United States. Now, no matter how self-interested and how short-sighted the people who run our country are, maybe they're smart at making money. I don't think it's in their interest or our interest to increase the likelihood of a nuclear terrorist attack on the United States, which is precisely what this counterterrorism is making happen. And if you think that's an exaggeration, let's remember what Ann Patterson said in the WikiLeaks documents. She said, I could read you the quotes, but take my word for it for a moment. She said, look, we're hated by the Pakistani people. Since we're hated by the Pakistani people, the Pakistani government feels it can't cooperate with us on safeguarding their nuclear stockpile because the public believes we want to steal their nuclear weapons, and they hate us so much. As you know, 69% of the Pakistani people today, as a result of the drone strikes, not just because they were born that way, because of our actions, regard the U.S. as their enemy, including potentially thousands of people who go to work every day at their nuclear stockpile. Their nuclear stockpile, by the way, is the world's fastest growing and most insecure by all experts. There's nobody on earth who would challenge that statement. So, as a result of our leaders alienating the Pakistani people, we've lost any ability to get control of their nuclear stockpile, vastly increased the possibility of conventional nuclear attacks on the United States, which would turn us into a police state. Now, I suppose you could argue that the people running this country really want that to happen. I find that a little hard to believe. My experience with them, and I was always amazed, I used to be a cabinet level member of Jerry Brown's cabinet when he was governor the first time, and I had chance to interact with a lot of CEOs. In my old days, I used to interact with generals, colonels, people in charge of things. I've always been amazed at how short-sighted they are, how they don't think about the big picture, how their only real interest is in more wealth, more power, and advancing in their careers.
Well, I have to say, Fred, I totally agree with you. I really wanted to kind of try to provoke you and set you up there, but yeah. I think that they are really stupid and short-sighted. In fact, just in the last few weeks, dealing with AT&T, which is, a government-granted monopoly, basically, and therefore acts, my wife is from the Soviet Union. She says, this is like dealing with the bureaucracies in the USSR when I was a kid. Dealing with AT&T, and I figured out this is how 9/11 happened, for example. Like, every person at AT&T that I talked to was a great person and tried to bend over backwards to help me. And that goes for everybody on the phone and everybody who drives a truck and does the installs and whatever, and yet none of them can talk to each other. None of the different departments have authorization to do anything right. They don't understand each other's protocols and whatever, and it's a complete and total disaster. And because all their incentives are they don't care if they treat their customers right because they don't have any real competition, they continue on like that. And you can just see how easily you could put the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI in the exact same position as these 4 or 5 different departments at AT&T that can't turn on my damn internet in a week and a half, Yeah.
Let me tell you where I am on this now, Scott. I've been changing a lot in the last years as I've begun to study. I described this when I was a kid. These walls, the movies where the walls were closing in on you was always my the movies that scared me the most, and there was no escape. If you look at the wall of what they're doing on global warming, what they're doing on to increase the risk of terrorism in the U.S., what they're doing to destroy the economy, and what they're doing to cause social chaos, it's quite clear that the current political system is beyond repair, in my opinion. I mean, I've written an article pointing out that we all would have been much better off if John McCain had won in 2008 rather than Obama. McCain would have done all the things Obama has done, but there would have been a big difference, which is the Democrats would have won the 2010 congressional elections. They'd be much stronger in Congress now and in the position both to try to solve the deficit problem by raising taxes on the rich and preventing all of these cuts to help hurt poor people, to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. The political system is no longer provides any answers whatsoever other than to stave off even worse catastrophes, which is, I suppose, worth doing. I think we're all in a situation right now very similar to the early 60s when events were conspiring to make it slowly clear to all of us that we had no choice but to go out into the streets, to devote our energy to build political movements and to get engaged in round-the-clock political activism. This is where we're at. We don't realize that yet, most of us, including myself. I have a pretty comfortable life.
All right. I'm sorry, Fred. We have to leave it there. I'm sorry, Fred. We have to leave it there and got to this break. Everybody, that's Fred Branfman. His new piece at AlterNet is Obama's Secret Wars, How Our Shady Counter-Terrorism Policies Are More Dangerous Than Terrorism. It's a great article. I urge you to read it. Post it on your Facebook. Pass it around. Thanks very much for your time, Fred. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.